this week's topic is kind of related, and it was essentially born out of the I think topic that you and Christy were talking about last week. But you talk about the nature of Jesus, the level of mythology versus reality that can be applied to him, and then you get into the basis for Christianity in a sense. Or the thing that makes it unique, this rapture. And so I kind of wanted to talk about that. John, can you give us a rundown of how people should, generically speaking, like what's the best way, what's the easiest way to understand the rapture?
Well, so the rapture, I guess the easiest way, are you talking about like what happens in the rapture or the theology surrounding the rapture? Because
what happens in the rapture?
Well, supposedly everybody's going to disappear and basically float up into heaven. They're going to get called home by God and everybody's going to get taken up into heaven. And that's the point when this heaven and earth are going to pass away and God's going to recreate everything in a new heaven and earth. That's what Jesus actually talks about in, I believe it's Matthew, somewhere in there, when he talks about how not a jot or tittle of the Old Testament law is going to go away until this heaven and earth pass away. He's talking about this end time stuff, this apocalyptic sort of view of things. And essentially everybody, that's like Judgment Day, right? From the Terminator series. It's essentially Judgment Day where everybody's going to get judged and are going to get led into heaven. There's multiple different ideas around this. Like some people think that everybody that has died, since Jesus came are sort of stuck in this purgatory, stuck waiting outside of the pearly gates, waiting for Judgment Day, and others think that Judgment Day just happens whenever you die. And so there's a lot of different theologies surrounding it. But I think the most important thing as far as the rapture goes is that when Jesus was talking in the Gospels, and what Paul understood specifically was that the rapture was to happen within their lifetime.
Yes.
So within their lifetime, it was supposed to happen. And that's the original context of it.
So I actually want to come back to that. And that was the thing. I tell you, when I was a young history major in college, and I took the Bible literature course, and I came across that. It blew my mind, and thus began my deconstruction. Or I should say it kind of started before that, but once I heard that and other things like that, like, hey, did you know that it wasn't actually Satan in the Garden of Eden? My mind was blown, right? I want to come back to that because I want to skip to Aaron, who has a very interesting story of his own. But Aaron, your experience with understanding the rapture is not like other Christians, is it? And so can you give us a little bit of your background and tell us what was different between the way that you were brought up in your religion versus what typical other Christians might understand the rapture to be?
Yeah, I was raised Mormon, and Mormons don't use the words the rapture. The rapture is something that happens after a distinct set of events that usher in Jesus coming back again, right? So, and there's going to be wars and rumors of wars, and there's going to be a huge war where all the nations are fighting against Israel, and there's a major battle of Armageddon on the plains around Jerusalem, and then finally Jesus will come back and he'll cleave the Mount of Olives in two, and when he comes back, that's when people will come up into heaven to meet him as he descends down into the earth. And I think that would be the Mormon equivalent of the rapture. And so when people say, oh, the rapture is going to happen, I said, well, no, because all the other shit that's supposed to lead up to it hasn't happened, right? Because it's all very distinct. In Mormon theology, it's all very distinct events. Like two of the apostles of the church will be literally in Jerusalem while the battle is raging, preaching the gospel and fighting against and doing miracles, and they'll be killed in the streets and they'll be laying dead in the streets for 3 days. And that's when Jesus will also come back. So yeah, it's a little more involved in Mormon theology and tied to very specific events that lead up to it.
Yeah, and that also, requires some dissection when you talk to members of different Christian cults, because they or maybe not just a cult, but different Christians in general. And you often say, well, there's 40,000 different Christian religions, and there's 3 million Christians, so there's 3 different versions of God, right? And 3 different understandings of or 3 million different understandings of Christianity. But some people say that those things are happening right now. Others say they're not. We've heard them all, kind of all world events being translated into that before. And so, yeah, there's a definitely a level of investigation that is required. To what level are these things happening? To what are they not? We've had callers on Talk Heathen who call in and say, hey, well, there are wars and rumors of wars. We're like, okay, well, just like our first caller, when has there not been wars and rumors of wars?
Can you be more specific?
Yeah, right. And that lack of specificity is actually really beneficial to religion. And that brings me back to the point that John made. So, yeah, what did it say? What did Jesus say? So I have it pulled up. Truly, I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. Heaven and earth will pass away. My words will not pass away. But then there was the other one. Verily, I say unto you, there are some standing here who will not taste death till they see the Son of Man coming. And, the most literal translation of that being Jesus is coming back soon. And I think that was, the way I always understood it. And John, correct me if I'm wrong, or tell me if you have a different interpretation. But the way I understood that was definitely anti-Roman propaganda, like the Hebrew cult at the time writing these things was going to have the last laugh. And so, what do you can you expand on that?
Yeah, I mean was it Revelation that is to be like sort of this end time sort of prophecy given by Jesus after he had resurrected and everything. I mean, that was definitely anti-Roman stuff, and it was definitely directed at a particular point in time. And I want to say that it was directed around the events, concerning Nero. I want to say it's been a while since I've looked at the Revelation stuff, but it was definitely anti-Roman sort of propaganda that was supposed to, coincide with what the Jews had always been taught by God or by their scriptures about the salvation of people. Because obviously when Jesus came and he eventually died on the cross and everything like that was a type of salvation that was provided. But the Jews and the Jewish Christians at the time were really looking for a more permanent salvation in the here and now. And so that's why you've got the Apostle Paul and you've got the Gospels that are treating this as if, it's going to happen soon because, that's what Jesus said would happen, or that this is what is the traditional teaching of the Jewish people when the Messiah comes back to provide the salvation and God decides to save the remnant, right, of the Jewish people. That's just what's going to happen. Like it's kind of like the final, salvation that's to be given. And so that's why you have all these things leading up to it. And then, of course, you've got all of the sort of justifying of why things haven't happened yet, or you've got people playing with numbers in the Bible in order to figure out when these things are supposed to happen. Because this is not, obviously, the first time it was supposedly supposed to be the rapture. There was a great disappointment in like 1844 or something like that, and then you just got one failure after another. And I think even like the Mormons, I want to say, have had end time sort of predictions, as well as like Jehovah's Witnesses have in the past. And so it's just like everybody's trying with buckshot in order to figure out when it's going to happen, because they can't just accept the fact that God says you won't know the day or the time it's going to come like a thief in the night, and it's just going to take you by surprise. I do have an interesting rapture story, though, that I've told elsewhere. But basically, when I was a kid, I remember one morning, it was a Saturday morning or something like that, I turned on the TV and I had been watching like TNT the night before. I don't know if anybody remembers that channel, but I turned on TNT.
Shawshank Redemption channel, right?
Yeah,
it's also known as the Shawshank Redemption channel. Yeah.
And
the Law and Order channel.
I had it on that channel when I went to sleep the night before. Turned it on the next morning, and Left Behind was on. But it was Left Behind right at the point where they're doing all the newscasts where like everybody has disappeared. So me not having watched any news whatsoever because I'm a teenager, I'm like, oh shit, did the rapture happen? I go around the house. I'm trying to look for everybody. Nobody's home because it's just me. And so I'm like, oh shit, it happened.
Oh my
And
God.
like I come back and I look at the TV and it's like, you know, of course, Kirk Cameron comes up there. I'm like, oh, it was just a movie. Okay,
You got
it.
War of the Worlds, man.
Yeah, I know. It happened.
So that's funny. So two things on that. One, in 1996, right before. We have a call coming up, by the way. So we are gonna caller. If you can hear us, we're gonna get to you in a second. But we gotta close this out here. So in 1996, when what's that movie? Independence Day was coming out. Right, it was a big deal. Big deal. Like this was going to be a blockbuster, which it was. But before it was actually released, our local news channel did like this fake story about how aliens were invading. So they set it up like a real news story, and they showed a picture of a UFO over New York City, a clip from the movie, and over the White House, and it was nighttime, and my dad turned on the TV and he called my brother and I, and he goes, "Come in here, look at this," and he tricked us big time, but we were scared shit. And then this general gets on like the podium and it says the Pentagon, and he starts briefing, and it was the actor that played the general. And my mom comes in and goes, "Wait a minute, isn't that guy an actor?" And then they showed the clip. They showed the clip of the UFO blowing up the White House, and my dad was laughing, and I was like, "You son of a gun!" But I was scared shit. But so I do want to close this out, but I want to get to Aaron real quick. Aaron, so on that note, you know, John brings up, you know, different kind of interpretations, predictions that the Mormons or other sects might have. And in your experience growing up as a Mormon, you know, what can you speak to on maybe some of these predictions or some of the requirements that you had to adhere to, maybe in order to be one of the saved? How were you as a Mormon different or better off than the other sects that surrounded you?
I don't think that the Mormons, I didn't really get a sense of doom and gloom and like you're going to go to hell and you're going to suffer. Mormons don't really believe in a hell like that. You know, and the second coming, I never heard any of the church leaders ever give a date on, oh, he's coming back on this date. They were always very careful to just make it general. You would read prophecies from some of the earlier prophets in the church about, oh yeah, Jesus isn't going to come back until New York burns to the ground and Boston floods and other just stuff like that. Stuff that's going to happen probably could happen randomly anyway, right?
Yeah, vague, right? Allows them to weasel their way out of an explanation. You know,
what was crazy about the Mormon churches, they also have these things called patriarchal blessings. So every geographic region of the church is broken down into stakes, and each stake has like 10 congregations. Well, each stake has what's called a patriarch. And at some point in your life, usually when you're as a teenager, you go to this patriarch and they give you a blessing, which is basically personal scripture from God. And it tells you like about your life and what you should do with your life and what God wants you to do with your life and what's going to happen. And so many of those patriarchal blessings have people saying, you'll be alive when Jesus comes again. Your kids will be alive and when the second coming happens. And it hasn't happened yet.
I'd be interested to know how they get themselves out of that one. And to John's point, you know, you end up starting to have to play with numbers, even for the promo for this week. For the promo for this week, in the comments on YouTube and Facebook, everybody was saying, well, you know, actually one day for us is 1,000 years for God, or 1,000 days for God. And it's like, oh, well, funny. I don't remember ever hearing that until you had to start explaining your way into making sense, which you definitely have to take some artistic license into getting there.
It reminds me of the prophecy that Jesus said, you know, surely someone in the sound of my voice will be alive when I come back. And in Mormon theology, there's a whole apologist explanation for that, where one of the apostles, John, actually never did die and he's still alive, right? He's been alive ever since.
Right. Yeah.
And so we're waiting for John to die so that Jesus can come back. That's a hoop right there.
Hey, John, you muted.
Yeah, I got it.
Oh, okay.
There's this interesting show called, I want to say it's called Forever. And it was only like one season long, but like one of the big twists at the end of the season that it was is that the guy he can't die. Like he like will jump off a building or something like that, and he just pops up somewhere else and he's alive again, right? We don't know why. Well, it turns out he was Lazarus. And so like God resurrected him, or Jesus resurrected him, and he can no longer die. And so like every time he supposedly dies, he just manifests like in this river or something like that. And it's just, it's so crazy to consider that particular part of the theology.
We can keep going on. I've got so many anecdotes and like experiences from being a child in like confirmation and communion class as a Lutheran, where people said weird shit and predicted all the end times. And I I'll have to save that for another day.